Another tool I came to recognize is to embrace the power of choice, the capacity for choice that we all have. And let me tell you the story when I came to understand this more fully. A number of years ago, when my daughter Lanny was 14, Lanny made the decision not to come home at 10 o'clock one night, which was her curfew, but instead to come home at 4 o'clock in the morning. And those of you with parents or with kids know what that experience is like. And so I was awake, waiting for that daughter of mine to come home, fuming. And I was thinking about all the things I was going to do and say when she came in the door. I was going to tell her how angry I was. I was going to tell her how much she hurt her mother and I. Didn't she know that we had enough on our plates? But somewhere before 4 o'clock, that voice showed up again that showed up before. And the voice said to me, Ted, of all the possibilities of what you could do when your daughter comes in the door, what would do the most good? And I have to admit, I had never thought that question consciously before. And what I came to recognize in that moment is the way I would make decisions is that whatever emotion was the most intense, was what I call had the highest score, is the way I behaved. And so if my anger was the most intense, I was angry. If my disappointment was the most intense, I was disappointed. If my hurt was the most intense, I was expressing my hurt. And so I thought about what would do the most good in that moment, and I thought about what I was feeling, and I realized that my anger on a scale of 1 to 10 was probably about a 12. My disappointment was about a 7. My hurt was probably about a 6. My love and my gratitude was about a 3. And yet I thought that probably expressing love and gratitude would do the most good. And so it was shortly after that little conversation in my head that Lanny showed up. And I think the universe was whispering to her to say, don't go home yet, Dad's not ready. And she came in the door, and I gave her a big hug, and I gave her a kiss, and I said, Lanny, I'm glad you're safe, and I'm glad you're home, and I love you. And she looked at me, and she backed up a couple of steps, and she said, okay, so what did you do with my dad? And on one hand, that was a funny response. On the other hand, it was a statement that says that's not how I responded to her typically. If I had responded with anger or hurt or disappointment, that would have been her dad. And so out of that experience, I learned that I always have choice. And I started to ask myself the question of all the possibilities, what would do the most good? And I have to tell you, when I ask that question and I focus my intention on doing good, the answers are often different. And I feel much more in control of my life. I feel much more responsible. I start to see how I'm actually in a place of creation. That my life is like a canvas. So what do I want to create in this experience? One of the things that I find interesting is how words have these powerful wisdoms wrapped into them. And when I began to look at the word responsible, what it really means is response-able, having the ability to respond as opposed to react, because reaction is not a choice, it's not a decision. And so I've embraced the responsibility of choosing my responses. And it's actually a good way to live. There's other things that I learned. I learned about living in the present moment. I learned that when I made a decision to be in my body in this moment, that my body got quiet and my mind got quiet. And I also had difficulty doing that because I had spent more than 40 years being someplace else, and so to be able to be in this moment was no easy feat. And I don't know about you, maybe it's a tough one for you too, but let me tell you a strategy that I discovered that began to work for me. I went on a weekend silent retreat, and when I began the retreat, the facilitator gave us a list of directions. And on that list were things like feel the bark of a tree, taste the salt of the ocean, feel the dew on the grass in the morning, listen for the sound of a babbling brook. And I was confused by the directions because it wasn't what I was expecting in terms of directions for this weekend. And I said to the facilitator, Why are you asking us to do all these things that I don't understand? And what she said was, she said, I've been doing this workshop, this silent retreat for many years, and what I've begun to recognize is that most people don't benefit from the experience because they actually don't show up. He said, oh, their body, or she said, oh, their bodies are here, but their minds aren't here. It's someplace else. It's at work or at home with the kids or thinking about their lover or whatever it might be. And so she said, I had to figure out ways in order to get them to be fully here, fully present, mind and body in the same place at the same time. And what I learned is that if I give them this direction, feel the bark of a tree, taste the salt of the ocean, feel the dew on the grass in the morning, that in order to do that, they have to be in their body in this moment. And she says, I call it getting back to your senses. And what it was about was, if you intentionally activate any one of your 5 senses, you need to be in your body in that moment in order to do so. And so I've come to recognize that that's a very useful tool for me in order to assist me to be present. And so now when I'm washing dishes, my hands are in the sink, feeling the warmth of the water, the slipperiness of the soap as it moves across the plate. And so every moment has the potential to be an opportunity to experience presence. Prior to this, I was always into the next dish, or after dishes were done, my mind was always on to the next stage. My goal now is to spend about 80% of my day in this moment, present. And I've really come to like that place. There's an ease to it. What I've come to recognize is that I can always manage the present moment, regardless of what shows up. What I can't manage is my imagination about what might happen, because it doesn't exist. So I can't manage it. But presence, I can manage that. And so there's a place to be in the future. Declaring intention is an act of being in the future. There's some joy in reminiscing the past. I'm not saying don't spend any time there, but I'm saying, where do you hang out the most? Do you actually show up here at all? Play with presence. See what happens when you do that. Another strategy that I learned that was helpful for me around presence is I used to worry a lot. And I wasn't ready to give up my worry, so I needed to figure out some way to work with that. And I had heard the wisdom about don't worry, but that wasn't a very helpful strategy. It didn't work for me. But what I learned is that if I would schedule my worry time, that I could do that. And so I started to wake up in the morning and I would say to myself, I'm going to worry between 7 o'clock and 7:15. And I'd actually decide a worry place. I'm going to do it sitting in the red chair in the living room. And let me tell you what I noticed when I began to use the strategy is that I would declare myself first thing in the morning, and then I was talking about worrying at 7 o'clock at night. And so in the beginning, many times through the day, I would catch myself worrying. And when I did, I would simply notice that I was worrying, and I would say to myself, thank you, but not now. I will take care of that at 7 o'clock sitting in the red chair in the living room. And my mind would go, okay, and it would leave me alone for a little bit, give me a little bit of peace, a little bit of quiet. And then maybe 15, 20 minutes later, half an hour later, I would notice worry again. And once I noticed, I would gently say to myself, not now, thank you. I will do that at 7 o'clock sitting in the red chair in the living room. And then at 7 o'clock, I sit down on the red chair in the living room and I say, bring it on. Somebody stole my line. And what I noticed is that I could spend the 15 minutes with those worry thoughts at the end of 15 minutes saying, thank you very much. And then declare again, tomorrow I will do this again, 7 o'clock, sitting in the red chair in the living room. What happened for me is very quickly my mind learned that that was the structure. And within a week, I spent most of my day with a quiet mind. Now, I had never had a quiet mind my whole life as far as I knew. And this was the beginning of it. And what I learned is that the mind is a very helpful tool, but you got to give it some direction. Most of us allow it to do what it wants, when it wants, and it runs amok. And so it's not unlike having a 2-year-old, and you say to the 2-year-old, I want you to eat sitting on the chair in the kitchen. You simply contain it to a time and a place. Well, our minds are kind of like that. And so if worry is something that you struggle with, I invite you to play with that strategy, see what difference it makes. Research tells us most worry thoughts is the same thoughts over and over and over again. And so if you only have to do it once, 10 minutes is plenty.